Okay, so today I want to expand upon the basic web node server that I did in the previous video. You can find the link to that down in the description. I want to focus on understanding the HTTP request object. So this script is running on the server. It's our little web server. If you're in the browser and you type something into the location bar and you hit enter, you submit a form, and it's being sent to this script. The package that's coming from the browser to here is the HTTP request object. So understanding that and how you can break it apart and look at all the pieces inside, that's what I want to focus on today. So last time we were using just the HTTP and URL modules. Today we're adding 3 more. So there's a string decoder that we'll use to parse the string that's being sent from the server. We're going to be looking at the util package, because there's something in there I want to use just to expand upon an object if we're using post to send something in. And formidable or formidable, it's written by a guy over in Europe. His name is Felix. I'm not sure if he's Swiss or German or French. By Felix I would assume that he's French, so I'm thinking that this package, this node package, is called formidable, but it's great for parsing through post data. When you're sending a post request, there's a whole bunch of different ways that it can be packaged and encoded. It can include files or just form data, and managing all that is a lot of work. So this script does a lot of that work for us. It kind of puts everything together in one nice, neat little package. All right, so let's get back to the request object. So inside our server, we have here our function that takes in 2 parameters. Create server is going to send the HTTP request and a response object into this function. Inside the request object, we're going to have a whole bunch of stuff. So method, this is one of the important things for handling the data. This could be get, post. There's a whole bunch of other methods as well. We can actually find out all the ones that are available to us. If we do console.log and we say, I want to know in request, what are all the available methods? So I'll save that and we'll open up our terminal. We'll run this and then I'll send a request. Now, the request I can do from my browser, so I can jump over here. Oh, this is the formidable package, or the formidable package that I was talking about. Here's the node documentation for all these different packages we're using. So HTTP, path, Querystrings, string decoder, URL, utilities. All these things are inside of here, and I'll provide the link to the HTTP one, and you can go back into here and use this as reference in the future. I'll also provide the link to the formidable package. Here we are in the browser. If I refresh this, we're going to localhost port 1234, and then I've just made up a path and I put a little query string on the end of it. If I hit refresh, I am sending this request off to our server. So back here, we're listening. Sorry, I made a typo here. It's not in the request object, the methods. It's in the package that request is created from. That's the HTTP. So inside of there, we'll save that, restart this. There we go, and I will once again refresh this. There we go, the request has been sent, and there it is. Here is the long list of possible methods. You can see there's a lot of them. Now, get, post, head, those are the 3 that you're going to use more than 90% of the time. You will occasionally use a delete, maybe an options, possibly patch or put, but get, post, and head, those are the ones you're going to be using almost all the time. Okay, so we've got that. That's running. I'll shut this down. If you ever want to find out, so that's http.methods. If you also want to find out all the available status codes, there's a list. It's a great little place to find a reference for all the status codes that are available. There we go. This is the long list of possible status codes. 200 200 and 201, those are the ones that we're going to be looking for most of the time. Those are the great, you did it. Basically anything in the 200 is a good thing, but 200 and 201, these are the ones that we're going to be expecting back from the server the majority of the time. 404, I'm sure you know, that's file not found. We've also got 418, I'm a teapot. That's a very useful one as well. Anyway, so those are our status codes that we get. Now those are all available to you at any time. If you ever have to compare, if you ever have to look them up, they are in there in the HTTP module. Now our request, we had the method that's going to tell us get or post. It's a good idea when you're using this to convert to lowercase. Now I'm not doing anything with it here, we will in a minute, but just to standardize, because you may get it in lowercase, you may get it in uppercase, depending on where it's coming from. All right, so we have status codes request.method. We've got request.headers. These are all the HTTP headers that are coming in as part of the request. Things like what was the content type, or if you're dealing with CORS, the cross-origin resource sharing. Sometimes you make an AJAX request and you get a message back, but you're not allowed to use the data. That's a CORS issue. So inside the headers, you can find out what the browser is sending to us. If we want to write those out, so we can take a look and see exactly what the browser is sending to us. So I'll start this up again. I'll jump over here, reload. Okay, here we go. So host, connection, pragma. These are the things, DND, do not track, accept. These are the different things that the browser is willing to accept, the languages that the browser is expecting to accept. Those are all the different things that are being sent to us inside the headers. So very useful information. And we've got one that means the most to us is the URL itself. This is, if you're ever going to do any routing, this is the one that you're going to need the most. So I'll run that one more time. I'll reload it. And there we go. This is, right here, the path that's being sent over to us. Okay, so now that we've gathered all this information, let's actually start to do something useful with it. We're going to create, from here, there is a method called parse, and we're going to take this path and the query string, we're going to break it into different parts. So we're going to take request.url, that's what we're passing into this parse method. It's going to take that, break it apart for us, and there's a parameter here, true, as you can see here, parse query string true. This means that we're going to use the query string module to actually break apart and turn the query string from this string into an object that we can use. So I want to make sure that we do that. Now we're going to have a property in here, path.pathname. So this is the property that we get from the url.parse. Now there's actually a few things. There's going to be path.pathname, path.search, which is the query string, and there are other things available in our URL object. There's port, protocol, origin, but when we are receiving this request, these last three are actually not going to be available to us because it's just the ending part after it's been parsed. So this is the path and the query string. And those are all going to be nulls. So if you look in the documentation, you will see these other parts, but they're all going to come back as null from this method. You can say path dot those things, but you're not going to get any values from it. All right, so we have our path.pathname. This is what we would use if we wanted to do routing, saying, okay, they're asking for this page or that page or that page. We can sort it out from that. The one other in here, path.query. And this is going to be the query string object. This is why we put true, so that we get this final parameter, path.query. This is going to be the object that we're going to work with, the query string object. Okay, so we've got that sorted. Now to send something back to the user, this response object, we're going to use that just so we have something going back to the browser. So response.writeHead. This is where we can put the 200 status code. If you want, you can also put the message in there. We could send 418, I'm a teapot. And optionally, we can also put inside of here an object. So if you wanted to add other headers like content type, and this will be text/plain that we're sending back, and we can resource.write. So if you wanted content, you could do write a whole bunch of times, and then end will be the end of the message. Or your content page, the end of your content page. Put a couple of new line characters in there. Okay, there we are. We're saving that. We will run our server. It's listening. Now, here, when I click reload, there, we actually get the content coming back. Here's the plain text coming back to our browser. There's was the request, and there's the message that came back. Okay, so that's working. Now, I haven't done anything in terms of working with the query string or reading through that response. That's our next step. All right, so let's jump over to Postman, where we can send requests. So I'm going to start up a new request here, and we're going to say HTTP localhost port 1234, and then anything at all. If we want to add query string parameters, we can do that. So name, value, ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there we go. We're adding these query string parameters on here. Now this is a GET request. Back over here, we've got our path.query object, and we can write that out if we want. Okay, so I want to send some requests over from Postman. And when I send those requests, I want to write out some of the query string data. Actually, I'll stop this. And inside here, in my results, writing back, and here's where we're going to use one of those utilities from up above, the util package. So inside that util, we have a method called inspect. And this will allow us to pass an object in. It's going to write it out as a string for us. It'll break it up into its components. So we're going to pass in the path.query. That's the object that we created up here. And that was coming from url.parse. So because we called parse and we said true, we got this object, which we can now write out inside of here. And I'm going to write a couple of new lines after that to make sure that this line and this line have space around here. Okay, so we'll save that. We'll run this again. And over in Postman, we'll create a new request. So HTTP localhost, and we need to put our port number on there, 1234, and then we can put in any URL that we want. And I'm going to put a couple of query string parameters in here. So it is get, and I'm on params, which will allow me to set some stuff in here. So name, value, ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and email is steve@home.org. All right, we click that, and here's our response down here. So the response and the message to the browser, and here's our object written out as a string. You can see it is an object, a JavaScript object, made up of this data right here. Okay, now what about post? If we switch over to post, then we have the ability to add a body here. Now, the data for the body can be set up in several ways, as I was saying before. There's form data, which is going to give us name-value pairs. There's form URL encoded, which is going to make it look like a query string, like it does up here. So there's different ways that this can be done. I'm going to start off with this one, the URL form encoded. So we'll have, here, let's clear out these params so we don't have any of those. and I'll put them in the body. So under form data, name Steve, email steve@work.org. There we go. So we're doing a post request, and we've got this data right here. It's no longer in the query string. So when we jump back over to here, this path.query object is going to be empty. There's going to be nothing inside there. So we'll send a request. There we go. It's an empty object. This stuff is inside the body. So we need a way of getting to that data, the payload data that's inside the body of the request. So let's do that. We will start down here, and we're going to use our string decoder object that we created up here. So we're going to create one of those. Come down here, and we'll say let decoder, just a variable name, equal new string decoder. And it's going to want to know what's the encoding type, which is going to be the default UTF-8. So the data that's coming to us is going to be a UTF-8 string. Okay, so that's the decoder. There's going to be a buffer. Think of the buffer as an empty container. When the request comes into the server, you're going to have all this data. It's a big long stream of data, so everything comes from the server. It's just this one big long stream of letters and numbers flying at you. And we need to take that in little chunks. So that's what the string decoder is going to do. It's going to let us take chunks of that and assemble a string. Now our request object has a couple of methods. On data and on end. The data method fires every time we get a chunk of data. So the stream is coming in, and we're going to say, okay, every time we get a chunk of data, let me know. I'm going to add that to my buffer. So there's a callback function. It's going to give us that chunk of data. We can call it data. We can call it chunk if that makes more sense. And we're going to say that buffer is equal to itself plus our decoder. It has a write method and the chunk of data. So this chunk of data that we just got, we're going to add that onto the buffer. Now for the end method, what's happened is we've gotten to the end of our stream. And this is the point where we're going to put all this stuff. So our last thing will be buffer equal decoder.end. Sorry, plus equals, don't want to overwrite it. And then we can write all this stuff out, and we may as well leave that one there, if just in case there's a query string. We're going to write out the buffer. And we'll put a couple of new line characters in there as well. Okay, so that's the work that we've done. We've got an onData method that's going to grab these chunks and add them to this string. And then when it reaches the end, we grab the last piece of it, put it on the buffer, and then that's when we're going to write our response out to the server, and we're going to write both the query string object and the buffer, whatever that was. So we're on post. We'll send it. Oh, we have to restart our server. There we go. Send the request, and here we are. This right here, that string is this data because it was sent in this format, so it looks like a query string. If we change it to form data and we add the same things inside of here, so name is Steve, email steve@work.org, and we send those things. This is how it comes through. So you can see how changing the way we're packaging the data changes very much the data that's coming out here, and if it's binary or if it's raw. So you're going to get very different responses. And you can imagine if you're trying to deal with post data and you don't know which one of those methods it is, you're going to have to take this buffer full of data and then start figuring it out and going, okay, is there a file here or not? Is there a file as one of these little partitioned areas? Is it form data, or does it not look like this? Does it look like form data, or does it look like BRAW? So you have to figure that out. And that's why we have this other package up here. This one. It's going to allow us to just deal with that on our own. So that works great, but we don't necessarily need to do that. I would use this approach if I knew with absolute certainty that I'm always getting form data, or I'm always getting URL encoded, or I'm always getting the raw. If you know what format you're always going to get the data in, this will work just fine. But if you don't, then what you need to do is start looking at what's the method. Back to our get and post. So if that equals post, else if that equals get, else, whatever you want to do with the other methods. So inside the get, I'm just going to put these things right here. I copy that back to what we were doing, and I'll uncomment these. Oops. Uncomment those, and we do not need the buffer. We're not using the buffer. So with our get response, we're just writing out the query string, anything that was in the query string. With post, now this is where we're going to use that new package, the formidable or formidable. Inside of here, let's say let form equal new formidable dot incoming form. This is going to be the object that will parse all that post data for us. So we call form.parse, similar to what we did with the URL here, and we pass these things in. So the incoming message, that's the request object, and the callback has these three things. So rec, and then a function, and inside that function, we're passing in three things. First one, it's an error first, which is very common in Node, meaning that if there was an error, you pass that as the first parameter to your callback function. Fields, this is all, if it was in form data, that's the name value pairs. Files, if there were files included, if there was multi-part data and you had files in there, that's what this would be. Okay, and if there is an error, we need to handle that. So handle your errors. I'm just going to do a console.error to write it out. Error.message, and we will return. Now, if there is no error, the rest of this code is going to continue. So we will write the head. It's going to be a 200 message. That was the OK. And let's just set the content type to text plain like we were doing before. There we go. And we're going to write. So the response coming from post, and we will end our message. So we should put a couple of new line characters there. And then the last thing inside of here, we're going to do what we did before with this. Use our utility class, but instead of path query, we're going to create our own object, which is going to include fields and files. And fields and files were what we got passed from this package. It will give us all the fields it found, all the files it found, so we're creating this as a JavaScript object that we can write out. Okay. So this should be our final test. Oh, I missed something here. End of input. Oh, I commented out my final line there. There we go. Listening. And we will send. And there we go. So the response that we got using form data gave us the fields And let's see, that's this one. Let's just rewrite it. Name is Steve and email steve@home.org. There we go. So it's a post request, and in the body we're putting URL unencoded, or URL encoded rather, which is going to give us the query string like value, but that package formidable is going to parse that for us. And there we go, we get the package with all the data in our object. All right, and that's that. That is everything that you need to know about the request object and how to handle post and get requests, how to parse it, how to get the bits and pieces out of it that you want. I will be doing another video on routing, and I'll be doing another video talking more about the response. I mean, we've done a fair bit with the response here, but I will do another video specifically on that. All right, so if you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments down below. I will leave links to the documentations for the formidable package, for the NodeJS, for the starter code that we're using here. That will be down in the description as well. And as always, thanks for watching.